Hello and welcome to Maximum Dre, the first talking book about the artist. It was written and researched by Ben Graham, music is by Amanda Thompson, and it's read by Sean Jones. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk, where you can also join our Maximum Collectors Club to receive special offers and free CDs. Alternatively, join the Maximum Collectors Club by filling in the registration form attached to the booklet inside this CD and post it back to us.
Just basically being a street DJ, DJing in local clubs in Compton. And what I did was I used to go in the club during the day, make demos and play them in the club that evening to see how it would work, and just blew up to this.
Like it or not, hip-hop culture now dominates our media. Musically, it has been the most popular genre for a decade, to the extent that hip-hop production techniques have become a mainstay of soul, R&B and dance records, and even the best-selling rock acts incorporate rapping, scratching and cut-up beats and rhythms into their performances. In the wider arena too, hip-hop players can be seen influencing the direction of movies, TV, fashion, design, art and business. This trend looks set to continue for years to come, and one of the biggest players on the field is undoubtedly a black millionaire producer and performer, record label boss and enemy of the establishment, known to fans across the world as Dr. Dre. Dre's rise to global success has been phenomenal. If hip-hop began in New York in the 80s, then in the 90s it was the West Coast that increasingly dominated the way that the medium progressed. The likes of Ice-T, Ice Cube, NWA, Snoop Doggy Dogg and Tupac Shakur took over where Public Enemy and Run DMC left off, moving the music in a whole other direction. And behind most of these acts, directly or indirectly, could be found the incredible, innovatory production skills of Dr. Dre. Hailed as the Phil Spector of rap by Newsweek magazine, Dre is the man who took hip-hop to the next level. Fusing the deep-fried funk of George Clinton with the harsh avant-garde techniques of Public Enemy's Bomb Squad, he created a dark, edgy sound that was tough enough for the hardest gangsters, yet smooth and sexy enough to make the ladies respond. With NWA, Dre proved that he could out-hardcore anyone, and there's nothing soft about his solo output or his work with the likes of Snoop Doggy Dogg and Eminem. Yet Dre's genius has been to create a sound that appeals across the board, breaking into the heart of the mainstream while retaining the authentic feel of the streets. It's the way the bass grabs you by the pelvis, the seductive rolling rhythms, the deceptively complex layers of sound, and the beats that hook you like a drug, get you walking like a pimp, and feeling like you're too cool for anything this world can throw at you. Dr. Dre was born plain Andre Young on February the 18th, 1965. He grew up in the Wilmington Arms district of Compton, south central Los Angeles, an area later to become notorious as one of the toughest urban neighborhoods in America. In reality, Compton was no better or worse than hundreds of other black neighborhoods around the country, facing the same problems: lack of jobs, a high crime rate, alcoholism, drugs, guns and gang-related violence. Gangs are a reality in inner-city areas all over America, and much as parents may try to keep their kids away from them, as soon as they go to school, they come into contact with one or other of the groups dominating the streets. If you walk around, you are always on somebody's territory, and people wanted to know which side you were on. As Dre grew up in LA, the two main black gangs were the Crips and the Bloods, and Dre's own neighbourhood was dominated by the Crips. The appeal of gang life to a young black man was seductive, as those in the gangs were the ones driving by in a big flash car, gaining prestige and respect in the community, while the ordinary guy was struggling to get a job and earn a wage. The gang members always seemed to have plenty of money, women and high living, and there was the glamour of taking on the system, trying to make your own way in the world while being part of a wider brotherhood. Many young men were sucked down this path, yet Dre always avoided it. He knew where it really led: straight to jail, if you were lucky, or more often than not to addiction, a life on the run, or a violent death. Dre saw another way out, another way up from the streets, through music. Dre first heard Grandmaster Flash's The Message at the age of 16. One of the earliest rap records to come out of New York, it was also one of the first to be more than party rhymes over mixes of other people's tunes. Featuring the use of a drum machine, bass synthesizer and live guitar, it also introduced the first example of rappers talking about real life, life on the street, about the ghetto, whores, pimps, hustling and hard drugs. Dre was hooked. Like many others, he recognised that this was music for and by his generation, his race and social class. It was music that spoke to him about his experiences and the world he saw every time he stepped outside his front door. A world that had previously been ignored by pop music and the general media, as though inner city areas like Compton just didn't exist. Dre was determined to become a part of the West Coast hip-hop scene, which back then was still in its infancy. He began DJing while still attending Centennial High School, playing school parties, block parties, wherever he could get a gig. He soon built up a reputation and before long got his first big break when he wowed the crowd with a DJ set at the all-ages club Eve's After Dark. The club's owner, Alonzo Williams, was so impressed he immediately asked Dre to join the group of rappers and DJs he'd put together under the collective name of the world-class Wrecking Crew. Besides Dre and Alonzo himself, the crew featured DJ Yella, The Unknown DJ and Clientele. Dre was largely responsible for moulding their unique sound on groundbreaking underground singles like World Class in 1984, Juice and Surgery in 85 and Cabbage Patch in 87. The world-class Wrecking Crew were purveyors of high-energy electro-funk, with tunes often in excess of 125 beats per minute. Their one album, Wrapped in Silence, showed Dre was already capable of creating a new sound from scratch, and equally capable of abandoning it just as the imitators were catching up and reinventing himself all over again.
I expected it to do good, but not as fast as it did, you know. It's shocking me also.
A defiantly party-based old-school group whose extravagant shows and outfits were designed for rocking the block parties and getting the crowds going, the world-class Wrecking Crew were a stark contrast to the way the LA sound was developing elsewhere. Another local rapper, Ice-T, had released his debut single, 6 in the Morning, in 1986, one of the first records to trade in what later became known as gangsta-rap. Spinning a story of the streets, trouble with the law, getting high, getting crazy and going to jail, Ice-T was inspired by the pimp-turned-pulp novelist Iceberg Slim. He would in turn inspire one Ice Cube, formerly O'Shea Jackson, to start rapping and writing hardcore, street-based rhymes in his group CIA, also known as Criminals in Action. Prior to joining the Wrecking Crew, Dre had gone into partnership with Eric Wright, soon to be known as Eazy-E, promoting house parties under the identity of High Power Productions. When Dre joined the crew, Eazy also began making his own records, releasing them through a local independent label, Macola Records. A former drug dealer who very nearly concentrated on a career as a postal worker, Eazy understood the importance of production, distribution and finding a market. Becoming dissatisfied with Macola's lackluster promotion of his talents and unwilling to sit back and let things slide, Eazy took things into his own hands. Removing boxes of his records from the back of the company offices, he distributed them himself, driving round LA in his Jeep, selling them by hand to hardcore fans. Eventually he realised that since he was doing all the work, he may as well go into business himself, and so decided to start his own imprint, Ruthless Records. Ruthless was very much a street-level company, a vehicle for Eazy and his pals, such as MC Ren, to do whatever they wanted. From the beginning, Eazy wanted to get his old partner from the days of High Power Productions, Dr. Dre, on board. But Dre had the world-class Wrecking Crew going on, and initially at least wasn't interested. However, when Alonzo Williams from the Wrecking Crew agreed to sell Dre his BMW, accepting payment in instalments, Dre proceeded to drive around LA, running up a series of traffic violations and was eventually arrested. Dre rang Alonzo, who refused to post bail. So, in desperation, Dre called Eazy. Eazy agreed to pay the $900 bail on one condition: that Dre sign up as a writer and producer for Ruthless Records. Dre had no choice but to agree. As well as Dre, Eazy-E had also signed Ice Cube as a writer, and the two soon began working together. Cube was on top form, producing some of the finest rap lyrics the genre had yet seen, although he was still performing away from the Ruthless imprint with his own group, CIA. Likewise, Dre remained with his other outfit, the world-class Wrecking Crew. All this, however, was soon to change. Eazy had taken Ice Cube's first ever composition entitled Boys in the Hood, written at the age of 16, and offered it to a New York outfit called HBO, who he had signed to Ruthless. HBO refused to record the song, claiming it sounded too West Coast. Eazy, however, had already booked the studio time, put the money in, and with no other tunes ready to go, he decided to record the song himself. Never the greatest rapper, Eazy-E's version of Boys in the Hood was, however, an underground LA hit, and this convinced Eazy that there was a market for a defiantly West Coast version of rap that didn't ape the New York sound, but told it like it was, on the mean streets of LA. Boys in the Hood wasn't a party record, it was hardcore, a tough, uncompromising lyric of growing up in the midst of gang culture, with guns, crack, and the prospect of a short, violent life. Neither glamorising the life or passing moral judgment, Boys in the Hood was the prototype for the all-star group that Cube, Eazy and Dre would then put together to capitalise on its success. Niggers with Attitude, or NWA.
A lot of people talk about keep it real, this and that. I mean, what's real is what you want to do, you know. Keeping it real doesn't mean you have to cuss on a record, use profanity, or, you know, talk about where you're from and this and that. Keeping it real is just being yourself, I think, you know. Staying true to yourself, doing what you like. That's keeping it real as far as I'm concerned.
NWA featured Dre and DJ Yella from the world-class Wrecking Crew, Ice Cube from CIA, and Eazy-E and MC Ren from Ruthless Records. Originally conceived as a one-off project, this rap supergroup hit so hard that all 5 members quickly realised there was no going back. Their first release was NWA and the Posse, recorded in 1987. After making the record, NWA disbanded, thinking that was that, going back to their old groups, looking forward to making solo records, or, in Ice Cube's case, returning to school in Arizona. When NWA and the Posse proved to be another huge underground hit though, the group swiftly realised they were onto something, and got back together to release a series of 12-inch singles as the roles within NWA solidified. Ice Cube, and to a lesser extent MC Ren, were the group's main writers and lyricists, while Eazy-E's contribution was primarily on the business side. The man who really put it all together, however, engineering the distinctive NWA sound, was Dr. Dre. With help from DJ Yella as his technician, Dre would take the group's disparate ideas, rhymes and beats, and form them into a coherent whole. Leaving the Wrecking Crew behind, Dre was forging ahead, using NWA as a vehicle to develop his own trademark style, a raw, hard-hitting production that perfectly suited Cube's aggressive, amoral lyricism. NWA exploded nationally with their second album, 1989's Straight Outta Compton, possibly the most controversial rap record ever released. Recorded in just 2 months at Audio Achievements in Torrance, California, the album was a brutal, vicious slice of gangster rap, with violence, obscenity and hate filling every groove. Just as its title suggested, the record came straight from the streets, with no concessions to the liberal sensitivities of mainstream America, and no attempt to clean up or romanticise the stories and attitudes contained therein. Ice Cube's lyrics were authentic, alienated and desperate, street-level reporting that was also designed to shock, and yes, entertain. For the brothers in the hood, this was something they could relate to. For the wider white media, this was a warning shot, a blast of hot steam from the LA pressure cooker that would explode 2 years later with the Rodney King beating and subsequent riots. Defiantly unintellectual and apolitical except in its obvious anger and contempt for all American values, Straight Outta Compton was the true voice of disaffected poor black youth. It wasn't pretty. The sound Dre created to accompany Cube's lyrics was compressed and streamlined, a claustrophobic, nasty groove that brutalised the casual listener as much as the tales of rape, murder, robbery and hate that it reflected. Straight Outta Compton was straight from the heart, uncensored and uncontrived, and the boldness of taking rap lyrics where they'd never been before inspired Dre to similar heights in creating a musical setting. Bleak as the record's outlook may have been, it also contains a furious, liberating energy and stands up today as a coherent, if unsettling, work of art. Straight Outta Compton also provided Dre's first serious brush with controversy, courtesy of its standout track Fuck the Police. While many saw the song as a legitimate complaint against the way that perceived ghetto areas were improperly policed, with the cops refusing to go into certain neighbourhoods, while at the same time displaying a widely perceived racism, again foreseeing the later Rodney King affair, Middle America and the law enforcement agencies themselves were incensed. Fuck the Police thrust NWA into the headlines, not just in the black music press but in national newspapers, where sensational reportage combined with the group's hardcore image of jerry curls and bulletproof vests led many to believe that they were genuine criminals. Hounded by the press and banned by MTV and many record stores, NWA then received a warning letter from the FBI, demanding that the offending track be withdrawn. The band, however, refused to back down, even when police authorities around the country began using strong-arm tactics in an attempt to stop NWA performing. In Detroit, they were warned that if they played Fuck the Police in concert, the band would be immediately arrested. NWA agreed not to perform the song, but seeing that the local media was continuing to whip up hysteria around the track, they decided at the last minute that they had to play the number everyone was talking about. As soon as they did, the band heard gunshots, which sent audience members fleeing as police rushed the stage and herded NWA off. According to eyewitness accounts and MTV producer Ted Demme, police had over 50 people lined up at gunpoint backstage, trying to find the individual members of NWA among the chaos. Demme was videotaping everything, including the moment when Dre and Eazy-E kicked open a fire door and made their escape, like outlaws in their own movie. The tape was immediately confiscated and destroyed by the police, who went on to arrest NWA at their hotel. They were later released, but through constant harassment and intimidation, the police intended to show NWA that they meant business. Ironically, the police condemnation of Straight Outta Compton was the very thing that gained it national exposure. For Dre, it was a taste of things to come, and a chance to get his unique production techniques heard by a wider audience. While individual members of NWA and other associates in the Ruthless Records family would drop by the studio to record their parts, Dre was there 24 hours a day, keeping the tape rolling. Dre was the one constant factor in the NWA sound, and despite the constant pressure, the young, ambitious producer was determined to continue developing his own uncompromising music.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like the gangsta rap era is over, you know. It's time for a switch, you know. Been there, done that. It's time for something else. You just can't, you know, use profanity on a record these days and sell millions. It's not going to happen, you know. You have to come with some skills. You have to come with some substance, you know. Whether it be tracks or vocally, you know, has to be something there.
Ice Cube left NWA in 1989, not long after Straight Outta Compton's groundbreaking success. There were a number of reasons for his departure, many of them financial, although as Cube himself points out, NWA had been conceived as a supergroup whose members would all eventually go their own way. All were also working on solo projects, and Cube was frustrated when his own album was continually put back, with Ruthless demanding that he write the lyrics for both Eazy-E's solo album and the next NWA record before his own could be released. Cube still wasn't under contract and had certainly been underpaid considering his input into NWA's huge commercial success. Dre, his old writing partner, was the first person Cube confided in regarding his decision to leave. While both camps stressed that there was no personal animosity at the time, things would soon turn sour as Cube went on to considerable success as a solo artist. His former bandmates felt slighted, even betrayed, and responded with a series of vicious disses on subsequent records. 1990's 100 Miles and Running EP saw Dre accusing Cube of being a traitor on the track Benedict Arnold, while threatening to sodomise him with a broomstick. Cube came back with No Vaseline and the Kill at Will EP, both sides resorting to depressingly homophobic jibes, while Cube also made several anti-Semitic comments against Ruthless Records executive Jerry Heller. NWA's final album was 1991's E-Phil for Zaggin', Niggers for Life spelt backwards, which, while containing numerous swipes at Cube, nevertheless suffered for his absence. Without Cube's furious, articulate rhymes, NWA's political and social impact was dampened, and Eazy-E's toothless rap seemed like a comic book parody of their once genuine rage. Despite this, Dre had once again jettisoned one hugely successful and innovative style, only to create a new one. Real Niggers from the 100 Miles and Running EP had featured Dre's funkiest beats yet, and a catchy, unsettling wah-wah riff, and he continued to develop this style on E-Phil for Zaggin'. The likes of Always Into Something were the first examples of what Dre would later term G-Funk, all whiny synths and George Clinton sampling P-Funk beats. E-Phil for Zaggin' entered the charts at number 1 and set the musical template for the decade to come. NWA were at their commercial peak, but it seemed obvious that the group had run its course. As others jumped on the gangster rap bandwagon and threatened to outstrip the originators, Dre was already looking to leave NWA and Ruthless Records behind. He'd released a solo single in 1990, We're All in the Same Gang, and in many ways he'd already left the rest of NWA behind. Dre was recognised as being at the top of his game, a fact even Ice Cube acknowledged when he got Public Enemy's Bomb Squad to work on his America's Most Wanted album, saying that if he couldn't have the best producer on the West Coast, he had to go to the Premier team in the East. But other parties too had their eye on Dre's by now legendary production skills. Marion Shug Knight grew up in the blood-dominated side of Compton. A physically imposing figure to say the least, he was a reserve linesman for the LA Rams before going on to become Bobby Brown's bodyguard. At clubs and parties with Brown, he ran into Ruthless Records rapper Trey Curry, alias the DOC, and both were impressed with the other's attributes. Knight recognised the DOC's formidable rapping and writing skills, while the DOC saw that Knight, an unorthodox, aggressive deal-maker with a gangland reputation, would be a useful man to have in your corner. The DOC was also an old friend and production client of a restless and unsatisfied Dr. Dre. Marion Shug Knight soon began managing both artists. Another management client brought to Knight by the DOC was a young rapper called Chocolate, who claimed unacknowledged co-authorship of several songs on Vanilla Ice's album To the Extreme, including the worldwide smash Ice Ice Baby. Knight immediately began taking steps on Chocolate's behalf to make sure that his client received due credit as well as financial rewards. Displaying the personal touch for which he was becoming renowned, Knight tracked Ice down to his Beverly Hills hotel and convinced him to sign over the publishing rights to the Extreme. Both parties deny rumours that Knight dangled Ice from the edge of a 15th floor balcony, but a certain degree of pressure was definitely applied. Knight then used his share of Ice's multi-million seller to fund the establishment of his own record company, Death Row Records. Knight allegedly used similar tactics to convince Eazy-E to release Dre and several other artists from their Ruthless Records contracts. After making repeated claims that the members of NWA were being underpaid by the company, he invited Eazy-E to a meeting from which Knight emerged with the necessary release papers. Eazy-E claimed that Knight told him he was holding Jerry Heller in the van outside and that he knew where his mother lived, while Knight's bodyguards lined the office walls brandishing lead pipes. Dre was now Death Row Records' flagship artist and house producer, leaving both Ruthless and NWA at the height of their success. Realising that Dre was the powerhouse and originator of the NWA sound, the band imploded once he'd left. Dre's first post-NWA project was the single Deep Cover, from the soundtrack album to the Jeff Goldblum film of the same name. Released in May 1992, it was another groundbreaking release that was to change the course of hip-hop all over again. Over a monotonous, sinister rhythm track that oozed with latent, stoned aggression and casual violence, punctuated by queasy one-note piano and horn stabs, it introduced the world to the distinctive southern drawl of one Snoop Doggy Dogg. The oral equivalent of a blurred serial killer snapshot, Deep Cover found Snoop laconically chanting 187 on an undercover cop over a starkly gothic production that was one of the darkest hip-hop records ever produced. Dre had done it again.
Right now on the streets, the Chronic is the bomb bud, you know. So I figure my album is the bomb, so we call it the Chronic.
Snoop was just one of Dre's first wave of signings to Death Row Records, and one of many invaluable contributors who, alongside The Dog Pound, The DOC, Rage, RBX, Jewel, Warren G and others, featured heavily on Dre's first solo LP, The Chronic. The Chronic quickly became the biggest selling hardcore rap album of all time, but its release was beset with problems. Dre had physically attacked Dee Barnes of Fox TV's Pump It Up, which resulted in a swathe of bad publicity in the press. He was then arrested along with 4 others following an affray at the Black Radio Exclusive Convention in New Orleans. In June 1992, he was charged with assaulting one Damon Thomas and shackled with a tracking device. Through all this, he was working on his album, honing its sound to perfection, until he was confident that he had a record that would blow everyone else out of the water. In November 1992, however, just as The Chronic was ready to go, Eazy-E and Ruthless Records launched a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Death Row and their new backers, Interscope, alleging that Dre had been released from his contract under duress. The two parties finally reached a settlement in December. Ruthless would relinquish all claims on Dre on condition of a royalty cut in all future productions. Eazy's continued interference and ongoing financial stake in Dre's career was one reason for the vicious diatribes against him, Jerry Heller and Ruthless Records throughout The Chronic. On the opening track, Dre mimics Eazy's high-pitched voice to mocking effect, and throughout the various rappers continually big up the Death Row family while putting down their adversaries. There are also the usual gangster scenarios, macho posturing, sleazy sex and praise of smoking weed. Chronic is slang for extra strong, high-grade marijuana and shorthand for the best. Thankfully, Dre had managed to produce an album that lived up to its title. With its sleazy, high-pitched synth riffs and low-down, funky, pimp-rolling rhythms, The Chronic was both smooth and sinister, laid back and dangerous. Dre was bringing back the funk like never before, sampling the likes of Funkadelic, Isaac Hayes and Donny Hathaway, alongside real piano, bass, guitar, dirty bass keyboard and complex drum machine rhythms. A fatter, more musical album than had been heard in rap for a long time, it introduced the style that would become known as G-Funk. If Snoop was the face of a new direction, with his angular cheekbones, long braided hair, loping walk and stylish outfits, then Dre created the modern blaxploitation pick soundtrack, fusing the 70s with the 90s to create something positively futuristic. The Chronic was one of the first rap albums to achieve huge mainstream success, while remaining defiantly underground. It went straight to number 1, yet its liberal use of obscenity throughout ensured minimal radio play. An immediate hit with the black community, it eventually crossed over to white audiences and contained some of the finest, densest lyrics on a rap album to date, courtesy of primary writer, the DOC. At that time, the DOC was regarded as one of the most accomplished MCs on the West Coast and released a fine Dre-produced album, No One Does It Better, for Ruthless in 1989. Yet soon after, his career was cut short when his larynx was crushed in a car crash. No longer able to perform effectively, he remains one of the most revered lyricists in hip-hop, and his writing played a substantial part in the artistic success of both The Chronic and Snoop Doggy Dogg's Doggy Style. The Chronic marries slinky, laid-back grooves to lyrics detailing the harsh realities of black urban ghetto life. On A Nigga With a Gun, Dre plays up to the stereotype of 20th century white America's number one bogeyman, while samples of the LA riots on The Day the Niggers Took Over and Lil Ghetto Boy lend the album an edgy authenticity. The Chronic sums up images of Dre, Snoop and their crew rolling through an apocalyptic war-torn LA in their Jeep, smoking skunk, stereo pumping. They're surrounded by rioting, looting gangs in a macho, post-moral urban jungle where, as in the days of errant knights, every encounter demands a confrontation. The Chronic remained in the Billboard Top 10 for 8 months, and Dre's original mix of hardcore hip-hop with lush funk and R&B grooves was widely imitated throughout the early 90s. Dre himself would further develop the sound and achieve another massive success with his and Death Row's next project, Snoop Doggy Dogg's Doggy Style.
Well, with Snoop, he grew up with my little brother, you know, so he's been around. You know, I never knew he could rap until maybe about 2 years ago. My little brother had a tape of him at a bachelor party, you know, and we popped the tape in. It was funky. So the next day, I called him up and we were in the studio, laid a couple of tracks, and our vibe was real cool. So if I'm getting along good with a person, I could work with him.
Snoop Doggy Dogg, real name Calvin Broadus, was a former Crip and drug dealer from out of Long Beach. He'd seen the error of his ways during his first stretch in jail, when he would show off his rapping skills to his fellow inmates. These were mostly older guys who'd spent a lifetime in and out of prison, and who warned Snoop off the dubious rewards of a life of crime. He was young, talented, good-looking and smart. They told him he could make it in the music business, he didn't need to throw it all away hustling. When Snoop emerged in 1991, he teamed up with schoolmate Nathaniel Hale, who became R&B singer Nate Dogg and producer Warren Griffin, known as Warren G, who just happened to be Dr. Dre's stepbrother. The trio christened themselves 213 and recorded a demo, which eventually came to the attention of Dre just as he was in the process of leaving NWA. 213 had tried to enlist Dre's help before, but he was reluctant to endorse them just because Warren G was family. Nevertheless, when Dre finally gave the tape a listen, he was impressed enough with Snoop's rapping to invite him to collaborate on the Deep Cover soundtrack. The rest, as they say, is history. 213 broke up, although the trio continued to work together, and Snoop signed to Death Row alongside the Dog Pound. After contributing heavily to The Chronic, Snoop went back into the studio with Dre in 1993 to work on his own debut LP, Doggy Style. While using the same G-Funk style as The Chronic, Doggy Style is an altogether funnier, more good-natured record. The squelching synths and rolling rhythms are smoother, more commercial even, and the album as a whole is a lot more upbeat and comfortable to listen to, particularly perhaps to white liberal music critics. The hardcore aggression of The Chronic is replaced by good time vibes and party rhymes. Rolling down the street smoking endo, sipping on gin and juice, laid back with my mind on my money and my money on my mind, from Gin and Juice, summed up the seductive lifestyle that Snoop was selling to black and white audiences alike. This record was strictly for chilling. The violence on Doggy Style is strictly cartoon, while Snoop presents himself as a narcissistic dandy on tracks like the Slick Rick-influenced La-Di-Da-Di. Doggy Style is a highly cinematic album, and not one that takes itself too seriously. Like a Quentin Tarantino film, situations and characters, including Snoop himself, are knowingly stylised and pumped up almost to the level of self-parody. Opening with a scene featuring Snoop in the bath, he is interrupted by a gang of his homies and gets into a discussion on the nature of hustling. Snoop preempts charges of glorifying the gangster lifestyle by answering, "It's the American dream, ain't it?" making a point that this is also well put in films such as Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. Snoop's letting us know that he's smart enough to act dumb. He's made his point and he doesn't have to labour it. From here on in, it's cruising music, for hanging out and kicking back, and fans worldwide seem to agree. Doggy Style was another huge seller, but Snoop's career was very nearly over before it began. Snoop and his bodyguard, McKinley Big Malik Lee, were at home in the Palms district of LA, when a friend of Snoop's, Sean Abrams, who was standing outside the house, got into an argument with Snoop's neighbour, Philip Waldemariam. This was the latest spat in an ongoing feud, and when Waldemariam drove off with two friends, Snoop, Abrams and Lee pursued them in their Jeep. They found them eating Mexican takeaway in Woodbine Park. The exact course of the events that followed is not known, but the result was that Philip Waldemariam was shot dead by Big Malik, who claimed that he was acting in self-defence, even though Waldemariam was shot in the back. Both Snoop and Malik were charged with first-degree murder. Snoop was later acquitted, but at the time LP tracks like Murder Was the Case seemed chillingly prophetic as life imitated art. For a while, Snoop became the media's #1 folk devil, particularly in Britain, where tabloid newspapers called for the rapper to be banned from the country, while questions were asked in the House. For Dre, it must have seemed like the NWA scandal all over again. Yet for the press and the record industry, Snoop, arguably the most cartoonish gangster rapper of them all, was suddenly the real thing, a genuine killer who actually did the things he was rapping about. The artist and the character being portrayed seemed to have merged into one.
I think, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's gone, and everybody that I talk to and has been around from the East and West don't even think about it or talk about it, so I think it's gone. It was just stupidity. I think after the assassination of Biggie Smalls, it made everybody just step back and really look at things and say, yo, this is stupid, I want to be able to go to the East Coast and feel safe, and I know Jay-Z and guys like that want to be able to come to the West Coast and feel safe. So I think everybody just said, yo, that's nonsense. I'm not even going to think about things like that. I'm out of that frame of mind. It's over.
The publicity of Snoop's murder case had helped to push Doggy Style straight to #1 in the Billboard charts, selling over 800,000 copies in its first week of release. The majority of these sales were not to disenfranchised blacks, but to middle-class white kids in the suburbs. The result of this was a much greater level of controversy among the white establishment. Gangster rap was no longer exclusively a black problem. Now it was affecting their children as well. Caucasian children in Long Island and Beverly Hills were now listening to and identifying with black ghetto life and its attendant stereotypes of gangs, guns, drugs, murder and sex. In itself, this was nothing new. Black American ghetto music has crossed over to affluent white households since the days of blues and jazz. But hip-hop as a musical form seemed utterly alien to an older generation, who took one listen to the lyrics, or what they'd been told about the lyrics, and declared a state of moral emergency. Our children's new heroes are killers and drug dealers. What will become of America? On the plus side, Dre's production skills were reaching a wider audience, many of whom afforded them serious critical study. Producing Warren G's Regulate and R&B band Blackstreet, as well as soundtracks for the films Above the Rim and Murder Was the Case, Dre was now being taken seriously as an artist, not just some upstart from the streets. Hip-hop wasn't going to go away, and neither was Dre. He was now recognised as the state-of-the-art producer, not just in rap, but in modern music as a whole. Suddenly the world couldn't get enough of Dre, and yet Dre had increasingly had enough of Death Row Records and the gangster lifestyle. In 1994, Dre was involved in a high-speed car chase with the LAPD, as a result of which he was sentenced to 6 months in a halfway house in Pasadena. Just as Snoop's murder trial gave him cause to reflect on his life and grow into a more mature person, so Dre's period of incarceration gave him time to think about where he was going. Under Suge Knight's direction, Death Row Records was becoming increasingly immersed in gang culture, to the detriment of the music. Warren G had left the label after being slapped in public by Knight and having his lyrics altered to contain pro-blood sentiments. At the Doggy Style launch party, Knight had had his friends beaten up and thrown off the boat. Knight had also initiated a feud with Sean Puffy Combs, aka Puff Daddy, escalating the existing East Coast-West Coast rivalry among the rap fraternity to dangerous new heights. Knight decorated the death row offices in blood colours and continued to intimidate his rivals. Stories of violence, torture, assault and kidnapping were legion. Another event that caused Dre to reflect on his life was the death of his old friend and later enemy Eazy-E from AIDS in March 1995. After marrying his girlfriend from his hospital bed, Eazy slipped into a coma. Dre visited him in an attempt to wipe the slate clean, but Eazy never regained consciousness and died on the 26th of March 1995 of AIDS-related pneumonia. Dre was trying to work on a reunion album with Ice Cube, who had featured, along with Snoop, on the Murder Was the Case soundtrack, and an album for his girlfriend Michelle, but Knight had other plans for his golden boy producer. After a long campaign, Knight had finally persuaded Tupac Shakur to sign to Death Row and ordered Dre to begin work on his album All Eyes on Me, even demanding that a tune Dre was working on, California Love, to be given over to Tupac. Grudgingly, Dre agreed, and the song became arguably the ill-fated Tupac's finest moment, and possibly the last great G-Funk record. But the final straw for Dre was when Knight signed the pop rapper MC Hammer, an old friend, and demanded that Dr. Dre produce his album as well. Dre didn't need this kind of shabby treatment. His star was on the ascendant. He was one of the top producers in the whole music business, never mind rap. And yet Knight still seemed to treat him like some kind of indentured servant. Anyone else with Dre's reputation would be able to do exactly as they pleased, and so quietly, Dre took steps to do exactly that. Going behind Knight's back, he struck up a deal with Interscope, Death Row's backers, to release him from his contract with Knight and allow him to start up his own independent company under Interscope's umbrella. Knight, of course, was furious, and from then on a Death Row release wasn't complete without an anti-Dre rap, usually, predictably, accusing Dre of being homosexual. Tupac in particular stuck the knife in on Toss It Up and To Live and Die in LA. but events were to prove that Dre had jumped clear just in time. Following an incident in which Death Row Bloods beat up a gang of suspected Crips, the BMW carrying Tupac and Knight was sprayed with bullets and Tupac was killed, dying on the 13th of September 1996. Meanwhile, Death Row Records was under investigation from the federal authorities for its alleged links to the drugs trade. And in November 1996, a series of assault charges, parole violations and missed court appearances led to Suge Knight being sentenced to 9 years in prison. The Death Row empire began to collapse as financial irregularities came out into the open and artists began to drift off. No stranger to trouble, Dre nevertheless knew when to walk away from a bad situation. With Death Row behind him, he was going to have to start all over again.
I can be a control freak at times, yes. You know, I collaborate with people well, you know what I'm saying? We get in the studio and we go back and forth on ideas and collaborate well. But if it's my project, I have the final say. If I feel strong about something, it goes on the record. No ifs, ands, or buts. But I will, you know, accept creative criticism.
The murder of East Coast rapper Biggie Smalls in 1997 marked the end of gangsta-rap. His death and that of Tupac sickened the rap community, to the point where everyone decided enough is enough. It was time to bring the peace, and the whole Death Row gangster image suddenly seemed too close for comfort. Luckily, however, Dre had already moved on. Having persuaded Interscope to let him set up his own label, Dre christened his company Aftermath Records and began signing up new artists. A rapper, producer, arranger, writer and lyricist, Dre is potentially able to do everything himself, yet it seems to be in his nature to always want to work with collaborators, to bring in other rappers and singers as light and shade to his distinctive productions. In a sense, Dre uses his artists almost as instruments in the studio, other colours to his palettes, tools to help create the overall effect that he's striving for. Just as visionary, legendary 60s producers like Brian Wilson or Phil Spector used musicians to recreate the vast symphonies they heard in their heads, so Dre deploys his players like a general mapping out a battle campaign, always keeping the bigger picture in mind. In 1996, Dre presented the world with his first post-Death Row release on his own label. Dr. Dre Presents The Aftermath was a showcase for the new artists he'd signed and a demonstration of the variety of styles that Dre's production skills could encompass. The whining synths of G-Funk had been abandoned in favour of sweeping strings, truncated horns, and Dre's now trademark one-note piano riffs. Throughout, Dre sounds like he has something to prove, yet it's not really fair to judge The Aftermath against albums like The Chronic. This is essentially a compilation, and if it occasionally sounds disjointed and ill-focused, then it's also deliberately varied, ranging from angry rap to smooth R&B and soul divas. The highlight is Dre's own Been There Done That, but the record also features the likes of Melman, RBX, RC and Group Therapy. Reflecting the mood of the times, Dre eschewed gangster rap for positivity, but for many, rhymes about working hard for your money and building up the business didn't seem as captivating as the old ghetto tales of street hustling. Dre's fanbase were confounded by the range of styles on The Aftermath, and others were perhaps put off by the number of unknown names featured, as the record was a relative commercial failure. More surprising, however, was that this was Dre's first serious flop in over 10 years in the business. It was something that he was always going to have to cope with one day, and yet just as the critics were wondering whether Dre had finally lost it, unbeknownst to anyone, his greatest ever success was waiting just around the corner.
Yeah, the album is incredible. I mean, everybody that loved the first album are really going to get into this one. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, we're waiting for the picket signs and what have you because of some of the things he's saying, but it's going to be a wild one.
Marshall Bruce Mathers III was born in Detroit, Michigan on October the 17th, 1972. He grew up on a succession of trailer parks with his single mother before ending up back in one of Detroit's poorest ghettos. A sharp, intelligent, introverted kid who nevertheless developed a protective bad attitude, Mathers was introduced to hip-hop by his uncle Ronnie, actually only a few months older than him, who gave him the Breakin' soundtrack album. The impact of hip-hop on Marshall's life was equalled only by Ronnie's tragic suicide in 1993, by which time Marshall Mathers was already rapping himself, under the stage name of Eminem. Eminem followed a single release with MC Proof in 1995 on a tiny local label with the Infinite LP on Web Entertainment, to general indifference. Already a notorious freestyler, Eminem came up with a concept that would further liberate his imagination while sitting on the toilet. His idea was to add a further alias to his repertoire, the cartoon super anti-hero Slim Shady, almost an evil twin through which Eminem could act out his darkest fantasies and give voice to the most taboo thoughts running around in this angry, tormented and sensitive youngster's head. The result was 1997's Slim Shady EP and a slot at that year's Rap Olympics in LA, in which Eminem came second. This led to a series of appearances on influential LA radio station 92.3, The Beat's Wake Up Show, which eventually voted him Freestyler of the Year. Among those listening out in Radioland was Dr. Dre, who immediately tracked down a copy of the Slim Shady EP. Dre signed Eminem to Aftermath in January 1998. At first, Dre didn't even realise that Eminem was white, but when the two finally met, the rapper's skin colour didn't bother him at all. The only thing that did was the bright yellow tracksuit Eminem was wearing. But Dre was blown away by Eminem's lyrics and delivery, and later admitted that the fact the rapper was white would actually be an advantage commercially, in that he'd figured they'd probably be able to get away with more. The two went straight into the studio to begin work on the Slim Shady LP, and soon built up a definite chemistry. Dre later described their recording technique as get stoned, freestyle in the studio for 2 days solid, crash out for 3 days, then listen back to what you've done and start over again. It was a formula that seemed to be a resounding success. Although Dr. Dre only produced 3 tracks on the Slim Shady album, handing the rest of it over to the FBT Productions team, it nevertheless clearly reflects the definitive influence of the man who had already outraged America with NWA, Snoop Doggy Dogg and The Chronic. Under Dre's watchful eye, Eminem's lyrical scenarios took in murder, suicide, date rape, sexual perversion and insecurity, AIDS, madness, materialism, matricide and hanging himself from a tree by his own penis. This sure wasn't Vanilla Ice. Eminem's rhymes came straight from the uncensored id, instant and immediate, with enough alternate personas to give Freud the heebie-jeebies. The whole point of the Slim Shady character was to say the unsayable, and Eminem was totally willing to sacrifice his own personal life and the feelings of those around him, including his girlfriend Kim and their 3-year-old daughter, in order to serve his art. In Eminem's case, his art demands that he express completely and honestly exactly how he feels at any given moment, particularly if those feelings inspire a colourful, imaginative lyrical flow. If I'm mad at my girl, I'm going to write the most misogynistic rhyme in the world, Eminem said. It's not how I feel in general, it's how I feel in the moment. The Source magazine called the Slim Shady LP a place where natural-born killers meet Pee-wee's Playhouse. Pushing back boundaries, Eminem reveals his own deepest fears and insecurities in densely packed, tongue-twisting, nightmarish scenarios. The 3 Dre-produced tracks, My Name Is, Role Model and Guilty Conscience, are among the album's strongest. And on My Name Is, which Dre also co-wrote, Eminem is already disconstructing his own media persona, inviting kids to copy his every action, while also pointing out why they shouldn't. On Guilty Conscience, Eminem and Dre duet as the devil and the angel on various shoulders in a series of moral tableaus. Progressing through a robbery, a one-night stand, and a man discovering his wife in bed with someone else, Eminem as the devil eventually wins Dre the Angel over to his way of thinking, pointing out how unsuited he is to the role. Better to be a devil than a hypocrite seems to be the message. Dre produced 5 tracks, mixed another 4, and served as executive producer on Eminem's follow-up, the darker, harder-sounding The Marshall Mathers LP. The record sold over twice the first week's sales of Doggy Style, previously hip-hop's fastest-selling album, and spawned the huge global hit singles Stan and The Real Slim Shady. Dre, alongside Snoop, Nate Dogg and Exhibit, also rapped on the track Bitch Please 2. With the release of the Marshall Mathers LP, Eminem became one of the biggest pop stars on the planet, taking Dre's sound to the ears of people who'd never listened to a rap record before in their lives.
I definitely prefer producing. That's what I am. I'm a hip-hop record producer, straight up. And that's what I'm going to continue to do as long as I'm on this planet.
In 1999, Dre finally released the eagerly awaited follow-up to The Chronic, entitled Chronic 2001. Yet anyone hoping for a return to the G-Funk sound of old was to be disappointed, as Dre refused to look back. Trading in a starker, more minimal sound than before, 2001's grooves are not so much hedonistic as bittersweet, owing more to a mid-80s synthesizer funk than 70s blaxploitation soundtracks. With echoing strings and Dre's one-note piano, the album is played entirely on live instruments without any samples, as befits such a personal record. On The Watcher, Dre reflects on the changes that have happened since his last solo LP, and the record as a whole shows a mature family man now in his 30s, considering the passing of time and the passing away of old friends, and wondering what he has to show for it. Besides a huge personal fortune and a back catalogue of classic tracks, of course. But Dre is no longer the young upstart on the block, more the old guard, practically the establishment, and throughout the album he's defending his reputation and his achievements to a new generation, who may indeed have forgot about Dre. A respected businessman with a wife, children and several houses in nice parts of town, Dre had long since moved out of the ghetto. Of course, getting out had been the objective since day one, but a man can still sit back and wonder at the distance he's come. The evocative opening of Big Egos, a plane coming into land at a rainy Compton airport, seems to sum up the distance Dre now feels from his roots. Yet 2001 saw Dre reunited not only with Snoop Dogg and the Dogg Pound, but also on Some LA Niggers, MC Ren from NWA. The album features new protégés like Hitman and Exhibit, and of course Eminem, whose entrance on What's the Difference is heralded by a swaggering funhouse rhythm as he offers his nasal whine vocal style to the chorus. Eminem also helped make the single Forgot About Dre a huge hit and incorporated it into his own live shows, where Dre would often join him on stage. When this happens, Eminem admits that even he's reduced to playing second fiddle. I work the crowd until Dre comes out and then I'm chopped liver. In the summer of 2000, Dre and Eminem toured America alongside Snoop, Nate Dogg, The Dogg Pound, Ice Cube, Warren G, Exhibit and Devin on the Up in Smoke tour. One of the biggest hip-hop tours in history, it covered 47 cities in 10 weeks, and besides its remarkable lineup, featured giant video screens showing specially commissioned short films, and an elaborate stage set constructed to resemble an inner-city parking lot. The tour was then followed by the film of the tour, and in 2001 Dre was already back in the studio to begin work on his next album. As one of the most influential artists in pop today, Dr. Dre has changed the course of hip-hop at least 3 times so far in his career. From the sonic rage of Straight Outta Compton, through the dread-soaked future funk of The Chronic, to the suburban cartoon nightmare that is Eminem. Which isn't to say that Dre created all of those records single-handed. NWA were very much a group. G-Funk wouldn't have been the same without Snoop, and Eminem especially is his own creation. Yet Dre guided all three towards commercial and artistic success, helping them to achieve their full potential. And his presence at each of these key points in rap history is surely no coincidence. So where next for the godfather of modern music? Despite his claims on 2001 that he's done with rap and we can have it back, Dre shows no signs of slowing down his work rate. Indeed, in many ways, it seems he's only just begun. With the troubles that beset his early career and the turmoil and unrest that characterised Death Row all in the past, Dre is finally free to create the records he wants, when he wants. A more mature, balanced individual than the 20-year-old kid with more money suddenly than he knew what to do with, who by his own admission went a little wild, Dre now has his own label and a wide range of production clients to boot. From Eminem to rising stars like Exhibit, Dr. Dre looks set to continue to influence music, not just hip-hop, for a long while to come. Forget about anything else you may have heard. When it comes down to it, it's still Dre.
Thank you for buying Maximum Dre. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. For more details on joining the Maximum Collectors Club and claiming your free CDs, check out our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk or look at the booklet inside this CD. Thanks again for listening and goodbye for now.